Good evening, everyone. My name's Jane Cawthorn. I'm one of the editors of the new anthology, Impact, Women Writing After Concussion. Here it is. And I'd like to welcome you today to our book launch. I hope you've been enjoying the video trailers that we've had playing for you. The links to those will be up in the chat, and we're pretty happy about them. And it takes a village to get a book out. And while this launch celebrates our whole village, this launch event is part of the Toronto Lit Up program, which is designed to spotlight new works and empower Toronto writers. So those reading tonight are all contributors from the Toronto area. Toronto Lit Up is funded by the Toronto Arts Council and spearheaded by the Toronto International Festival of Authors. Similarly, our land acknowledgement also focuses on the Toronto area. We acknowledge that words and stories have been shared on this land for thousands of years. Toronto International Festival of Authors operates on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Wendat peoples. This land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, a treaty to peaceably share and protect this land through friendship and respect. We thank those who have cared for this land, and we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here and connect through stories. Tonight is all about connecting through stories. I have a few more thank yous to offer before we get to that. First of all, I'd like to thank the Canada Council for the Arts, who supported the creation of this work. I'd like to thank St. Michael's Hospital Foundation and Dr. Shree Bhalerao and his team at the Head Injury Clinic at the St. Michael's Hospital for his enthusiasm for the project. I'd like to thank Anjula Gogia and everyone at Another Story Books for being our official bookseller and supporting this event. Please, everyone, support your local independent bookstores. They are really the lifeblood of our main streets and our communities, even in a big city like Toronto. Information for ordering from Another Story will be put in the chat by Kathy Crooks of University of Alberta Press. So I have a special thank you to Kathy Crooks as well, and to everybody at the University of Alberta Press who gave this book a home and did so many wonderful things to make it a beautiful book and to bring it out in the world. They were on board with us as soon as we pitched this, the minute we pitched it, and their support has never wavered, and we're so grateful. Obviously, very grateful to Toronto Lit Up and the Toronto International Festival of Authors too, and to Jennifer Ball, who's helping us out tonight. Very important thanks next to Edie Morin, Elaine Morin, my co-editor and colleague. I could not ask for a better colleague, a better working relationship with anybody in the world. We've done 2 books together now, and I'm so proud of the work that we've done together. It feels very strange to be sitting here without Elaine at my side, but I know she's in the audience tonight, and she's probably lighting up the chat. And I will similarly be in her audience when she has an event like this with the Calgary Public Library in their Books and Ideas program in November. Thanks, Elaine, for everything. Just cannot believe how blessed I am to work with you. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, I'd like to give special thanks to the 21 contributors to this book, without whom there would not be a book to launch and to celebrate tonight. Every single one of the writers bared their souls to describe their lives in the aftermath of concussion and traumatic brain injury, and I learned more from them. We both did, Elaine and I know Elaine wants to join me in all these things too. We learned more from them than anybody else, any of the doctors and books that we've read, and we learned from their wisdom and their vulnerability, and sometimes their anger and their joy, and their incredible empathy. This has been the greatest working experience of my life, and all of you made it so. The epigraph to Impact comes from Arthur Frank, who writes that sooner or later, we are all wounded storytellers. It's been an honor and a privilege to be in this particular group of wounded storytellers. It's my pleasure now to introduce science writer and broadcaster Jay Ingram, who's with us tonight to moderate. Jay was co-host of the Discovery Channel science show, Daily Planet, for 16 years, and is also well known by Canadians as the former host of the CBC science show, Quirks and Quarks. Jay has written 19 books, 3 of which have won Science Writers Awards and several of which have been bestsellers. He's the 2015 recipient of the Walter C. Alvarez Award for medical writing, given by the American Medical Writers Association, and it is an honor to have Jay with us tonight. Can we bring Jay up onto the screen? Here he is.
Here I am. Thank you, Jane, and welcome everybody. I promise you, this is going to be a really impressive and emotional evening. We're going to be hearing, as Jane has already said, from several of the Toronto-based contributors to Impact. Each is going to do a brief reading from their essays. I'll have an opportunity to chat with them, and so will you. If you have questions for any of our authors, you can enter them in the chat section, which you see at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If possible, if a question seems particularly appropriate to the person I'm speaking to at that moment, I'll try and introduce it. But don't worry, even if your question doesn't get answered right away, we will be devoting some time to audience questions with all of our contributors. Whoa, sorry about that, at the end of the readings. And I don't really want to say this, I've hinted at it, but this is going to be an illuminating and emotional evening. Impact is really an extraordinary book. It provides insights into concussion that will take all of us much deeper than the familiar outlines of the condition that we know. It's eloquence under the weight of concussion. I also don't need to say that it takes a lot of courage to write about oneself in the way that our authors have. And I remind you, they're not medical experts. This is not an update on research into or treatment for concussion. So please don't ask us for medical advice. We can't give it. Instead, take this opportunity to reflect on the many and varied effects that concussion can have and the insights you will get from that. Our first reader tonight is Diana Smith. She's going to read from her poem, Another Ordinary Day. Diana's a writer, teacher, and arts educator. Her writing has been published all over the place in anthologies, high school texts, online magazines, print magazines, podcasts. She's currently working on a novel based on her experience of being an immigrant to Canada as a child. Diana.
I've got you can hear me now?
Yep.
All right. Yes, good to be here. Thank you to Elaine and Jane for putting this anthology together. I'm looking forward to reading the work of the other participants, and it is very emotional because it's a long struggle, often alone and invisible, dealing with a traumatic brain injury. Here's just an excerpt of my poem. And thank you to all my friends that I see in the chat section that showed up. I remember watching with envy as kids in the neighborhood sped on their bikes around the park, on sidewalks, and in and out of laneways. I remember getting the occasional turn just to the end of the block and back. I remember my little brother's baby finger caught in the chain of one of those bikes. I remember blood streaking the back of Mom's white t-shirt as she ran up our apartment stairs with him in her arms. I remember flying down a too steep hill on my cousin's hand-me-down banana seat bike, muddying my favorite polyester pants as I wiped out at the bottom. I remember riding on bike paths that took me far from our low-rise buildings, beat it blasting through the headphones of my Walkman, my parents never knowing where I was. I remember cycling to job interviews, protests, movies, and once to a neighborhood bar with a date perched on my handlebars. I remember a group of men leaning against a multicolored brick wall, a brilliant blue late morning sun above their heads. I remember a car door opening, a driver stepping into my path. I remember trying to get me and my bike up off the road, voices above my head asking, was I okay? I remember reading Their Eyes Were Watching God the week before. I remember the words blurring, sliding, and jamming together the week after. I remember sleeping for 16 hours, then napping for 2, 3, or 4 more. I remember never feeling rested. I remember every slant of light like a needle pricking my eyes, a jolt of electric current through my nervous system with any sudden noise. I remember wanting my partner to return from her trip and wishing my best friend still lived in Toronto. I remember mom telling me blueberries were brain food. I remember my grandmother coming to me in a dream, saying, rest, sweetheart, just rest.
Thank you, Diana. Uh, those are amazing memories, ranging from dreams to actual experiences over different periods of time. How did you go about gathering together those memories to write about them?
I think that remembering and memory is such a huge part of dealing with a concussion. And I spent so much time, tired, um, and thinking about the experience of my accident. And literally this was a dream where my grandmother, after me struggling and just feeling so, am I ever going to get out of this? Will I ever be, healthy again? And my grandmother, who had passed not that long ago, came, and this was one of the, beautiful thing just to say, for similar to what neurologists had said, yeah, you just need to rest. I think memory is a theme that a lot of the other participants will probably speak to.
In your essay or your poem, you also mention being labeled incompetent, lazy, slacker. Is that part of the invisibility that you referred to, in that people can't tell that you have a concussion?
Yes, that definitely is. And it's also internalized because we don't have a cast on our arm or on our head. I struggled with, am I really, as sick as I feel? And so, being part of a society where it's always go, 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 and having been a go, go, go person with several things happening when I got into my accident, reminding myself that, yes, I actually do have a brain injury. Not that I intellectually needed to remind myself, because I was sleeping for 16 hours and resting for, taking long naps also. So it wasn't that I didn't feel it. It was just still struggling because I didn't have that external broken limb or walking with crutches, as many other, injured folks have.
Yeah, it's the difficulty, the different, how to fit into the rest of the world around you, but also the world that you lived before.
Yes.
You in the book, you offer a tribute to Joe Brainerd's I Remember. And there's a quote from that I want to just end this little question session with. He wrote, "No memory is insignificant." What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, that's in some ways our experience. Well, our experiences are what define us, and our memories are, a crucial part of how we identify. So it is beautiful to have those memories, and none of them, riding with kids and behind those buildings, listening to Michael Jackson. There's 40 years ago, those memories are, but they are still significant.
Well, thank you very much, Diana.
Thank you, Jay.
Our next reader is Judy Rebick. She's going to read from her essay, Losing My Mind. Judy, of course, is one of Canada's best known feminists. an activist. She's former president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, a founding publisher of rabble.ca, definitely not rebel, but rabble. And she's a prolific writer. She's written 6 books. Her most recent, a memoir, Heroes in My Head, details her struggles with depression and dissociative identity disorder. Judy.
The video is tricky.
There you are.
Thank you very much, Jay, and thank everybody who was involved in this book, and especially Jane and Elaine, who did so much work, and the others that I'm starting to get to know. Okay, so here's my piece. Sorry, it's been more than 5 years since my concussion, and I'm still struggling with what some call post-concussion syndrome. I say some because I've had doctors who say there's no such thing as PCS. That's how it is having a concussion. One doctor says one thing, another says something else. No one really knows what will help you heal. Concussion is classified as a mild traumatic brain injury. Maybe because they can't see the damage through imaging, but it doesn't feel mild. They can't see it, but I can feel it. Almost every day, I feel the fatigue, the inability to concentrate, the frustration of feeling I can't do things. I feel the loss of some of my cognitive ability. I can't think as fast as I used to. I've made a living by thinking fast as a host and pundit on TV and radio. I can't do that anymore. I can barely read, and I'm a writer. My sleep has been more disrupted than usual. I can't stand situations in which there's background noise and my brain has to distinguish between the noise I'm supposed to pay attention to and the noise I'm not supposed to notice. I didn't know this was called cognitive dissonance until year 3. After a crowded party or reception, it takes me 2 days to recover, which means 2 days in bed. When I was first hurt, it was a lot worse. I guess every serious illness makes you feel like a different person, but it's extreme with a concussion. Your brain is the thing that has changed. And after a while, it's an identity crisis. I wonder, who am I now? After a lifetime of involvement in politics and journalism, I had to stop reading the newspapers because I couldn't stop crying when I read something sad, which is practically everything these days. I could only watch comedy on television because everything else upset me too much. My emotional reactions were odd for me, not simply because I was a journalist, but also because I had been dissociated from my feelings most of my life as a result of childhood sexual abuse. The strange thing was, the one emotion I could always feel, even when I was most dissociated, anger, was gone. In its place was a bottomless pit of grief. I was told this symptom is called emotional lability. It's a major liability, but that's a different word. Try telling someone you have a condition called lability. They look back with a confused expression, wondering if you thought that before you didn't have any liabilities. That's my
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. You know, you've been an extremely independent thinker, an independent person all your life. And that's been curbed, I guess, somewhat by your concussion. Can you address that a little bit? Has that been a major loss for you?
Well, yeah, in the sense that when I first got hurt, I really needed to feel independent. Like, I stayed at my brother's place the night of the accident, and you know, because you have to know if there's going to be a bleed, and so somebody has to wake you up every few hours. And I went home the next morning because I had just had this very powerful need to be independent, and I probably should have stayed longer with my family, but I didn't. So I've tried everything I can to maintain my independence, but it has been difficult at times. I think I still am pretty much an independent thinker, though. I don't think that's changed. I'm still pretty, not, I think that I've managed to maintain that.
That will never be lost, I'm
I
sure.
don't think so.
No, you refer a couple of times in your essay to the impact of concussions on marginalized people. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'm lucky. In a way, I'm lucky because I had my concussion after I was retired. So I didn't lose my job, which a lot of people do. And I was able to survive, because I had some savings. I mean, I used up all my savings, but I did have the savings. Whereas a lot of people with concussion don't have that. Like a friend of mine told me that a vast majority of people on the street have concussions. Now, we don't know if they got a concussion being on the street, because that's common too, or if they had concussions and that's why they're on the street. And I went to St. Mike's, had a support group for a while that I was going to. And in that group was a lot of much younger people. And it was so tragic. Like there were young people there who were just beginning their career, and the concussion put an end to that. And they didn't know if they'd ever get better. And so I think that for young people, for marginalized people, there's not the support there should be. There's not an understanding of how serious the injury can be. And it's not for everyone. I know people have had concussions and recover quickly, but it is, especially with women, a fairly significant percentage where the concussion symptoms continue and you can't work. Even yesterday I was teaching a class. Now it's 5.5 years for me. Yesterday I had to teach a class, and today I could barely function. And that's something I've done all, for the last 20 years. So it's really hard to deal with it. And, if you don't have a home, if you don't have an income, if you don't have family, it's devastating.
I applaud you for, in the middle of the intensity of the highly personal state that is concussion, that you are thinking about others. Thank you very much, Judy.
You.
Our next reader is Amy Stewart. She's going to be reading from her essay, Finding the Switch. Amy's a best-selling author of 3 books, 3 novels: Still Mine, Still Water, Still Here. She was shortlisted for the Arthur Ellis Best First Novel Award and won the 2011 Writers Union of Canada Short Fiction Competition. And she's spoken on the CBC about how her concussion gave her inspiration for her 3rd novel. Amy.
Thank you. So I suffered a concussion in 2017, late January 2017, when I was coaching my middle son's hockey at a practice. And so about 4.5, 5 years ago, which seems like it's pretty amazing that it's been that long. I was halfway through writing my 2nd novel when I hit my head on the ice. I was wearing a helmet, but my brain jostled within it. My neck snapped back. I remember staring up at the arena ceiling before attempting to stand. I remember blinking and feeling a strange quiet come over me, as if something were flickering off. After that fall, I was still a writer. Outwardly, very little in my life changed. I was good at finding ways to move through the days, even if my brain felt different. I was able to appear competent and articulate, to be the person most people expected me to be. But inwardly, parts of me were missing. My creative brain flickered, and then it was off. In the darkness, I could no longer find the switch. In the first weeks after my concussion, I'll seek out other people who have also suffered one and seem to have recovered nicely. I'll look for the good news stories. I'll learn that after a concussion, you become part of a club, that this club is exclusive and offers a tiered membership. One tier is for those who've experienced concussions proximately through a child, a spouse, a friend, or a colleague. They are a tier of caregivers and empathizers who learn the language of brain injury on behalf of their concussed loved ones. The next tier is for those who've suffered a concussion or 2 of their own, but recovered quickly. These are the lucky ones who followed a straight path and showed regularly scheduled improvements. The last tier, the highest, or perhaps lowest if we're being literal, is reserved for those of us who endure complications, recoveries both wayward and nebulous, that are unfixed in their timelines and full of regressions, long leaps forward, ever-changing symptoms. People in the Concussion Club welcome you the same way you hug an old friend at a funeral. It's not a place anybody wants to be. You're there because something bad has happened and your life has been altered. But it offers much comfort in shared commiseration. Over the next few months, I'll seek out as many members of this club as I can. Eventually, as months and years pass, I'll become an elder member, graduating to a tier I never wanted to be in. I'll be the one welcoming people at the door, embracing them and offering whatever words I know they need to hear, because I know all the words now. I've learned them the hard way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. You mentioned that your creativity switch seemed to flip. Can you try to give us a feeling of what that felt like?
So at the beginning of my essay, talk about, I wrote, as you said, I've written 3 books, and the first 2 I wrote really before the concussion. This concussion happened when I was about halfway through the second. And I had little kids at the time. My kids are now 10, 12, and 14. So, when I was writing my books, they were really little, like diapers. So I found time to write wherever I could. Like I was writing in hockey arenas, in libraries, in coffee shops, doctor's offices, like anywhere I could find a place to write, I was writing. And so that required a real like on and off switch. Okay, I need to write, I need to edit 5 pages, I need to write, I need to do it right now. And that's how I always thought I developed like a real competency with that. And that the concussion just like turned that switch off. I couldn't find it. It was like I was in a dark room and it wasn't there. So I would sit down to try to write, and just wouldn't happen. And I've had writer's block before. I've experienced like days that didn't feel good as a writer. I couldn't get much out, but this was different. This was like a blank, like a blankness. It's really difficult to describe what it feels like to have, as a writer, when your brain is, your problem is you're full of ideas, and then it was just like my head was empty. So I really had to work hard to find that switch again.
Is it back?
Yes, it is, but it's a little, it's not, and I would say it is back. I found a care provider who really helped me, and I talk about that in the essay too. And so it did come back. I think like the workings of the world in the past year have affected it too. I mean, I've been effectively home with 3 kids and a dog for, the length of a pandemic. So that's affected it. But generally speaking, I did find it again. I don't think that, I think that some things are permanently changed in my brain. Like I said in the essay, there's a language that I have to speak now around concussion and taking care of myself, self-care, and, making sure I don't get too tired, and I keep my stress levels, all that stuff that was never really an issue before. But yes, I think I'd say it's back.
Well, that's really good news. Just quickly, if you read your 3rd novel now and compare it to your first, besides the fact that your writing would have evolved, can you tell it's different?
Yes. So I think that in the 3rd novel, I think that there's there's almost like an energy in the 3rd novel. Like I was a little more reserved in my earlier career as a writer. And I think by the time I got to the 3rd novel, I just really felt like, I need to pour this out. I need to say exactly what I mean. I need to give my characters really intense voices. I need to allow them to be angry and sad and full of grief. And so I think that there's less holding back. And that comes from, I think all of us who've experienced concussions recognize like just how quickly things can change for you in your life. So you really have to sort of hold on tight as you know, as you're moving along.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Tracy Wadebor. She'll be reading from her essay, A Wave of Relief. Tracy is a writer, mixed media artist, arts educator, exploring human experience through creative and community-based work. Tracy published her first poetry collection, Maybe Basically, last year with Anjula Press, and has led creative writing programs for individuals of all ages and backgrounds with Centauri Arts Camp and Academy and the Toronto Writers Collective. Tracy.
Thank you so much. When it happened, I felt a wave of relief. Now, I'm aware this isn't the typical response to a brain injury, but at the time I felt I'd been given an opportunity to pause and stop everything. I could recede into a quiet place, turn out the lights, and just be there for as long as it took. Sometimes I even think I needed it to happen. Here's how it happened. My sister and I accidentally knocked heads at a bowling alley on her birthday. We often laugh uncontrollably around each other. This particular time, neither of us realized how close together we were, and she caught the left side of my head with her forehead. She was fine except for a small bruise that formed near her eyebrow. I, on the other hand, woke up the next morning to a concussion. I was 6 months from turning 30 and 7 months from finishing my PhD. I was on the cusp of a new chapter in my life. This much was obvious. What wasn't obvious was that throughout my late 20s, I'd begun to feel as if something in me was out of place. My inner life had become unsustainable, and I'd long sensed an impending event that would ask me to change. Back then, I didn't even realize my dissertation, the thing I did every day, was making me miserable. I'd been doing a PhD for 5 years because I didn't know what else to do, and everyone told me it's what I should be doing. I knew I couldn't go into the next decade of life feeling the way I did. I was in constant conflict with myself. It was as if someone was arguing with me about every decision, every desire, pretty much all the time. It was endless and it was exhausting. I had become my own antagonist. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. This business of being your own antagonist is actually a hilarious part of your essay, where you describe there's me and then there's the other me. And I guess I'll wear jeans this morning. No, you're not going to wear jeans. That would be silly. Was that always a feature of your life before the concussion?
I don't know. I think it got worse throughout my PhD. I think part of it, and as I say in the essay, a lot of what I was doing was political philosophy. So it's a lot of preparing for arguments, preparing for things someone might say in response to you, just thinking of things from every possible angle. And I think that impulse had just gotten worse and worse and had started sort of turning in on me throughout my studies.
Well, it's interesting how in that ironic and curious sense, your concussion sort of relieved you of that inner debate. There aren't very many people, as you hinted, who gain something. The other thing that really struck me in your essay was that water was really important to you, both physically and metaphorically. Could you explain that a bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this was something that I think Jane mentioned in an email, was just the multiple mentions of water from other participants and other writers in this collection, which really struck me. But for me, I think water has always been something that I find deeply calming. I think, if I'm ever on an airplane and we're going through bad turbulence, I just imagine like being surrounded by water, and I just think, oh, nothing bad could happen when you're just floating along in the river, And so that's what came to me immediately when I woke up that day, and I just knew something was wrong. But I couldn't really sense what was wrong. And I just thought I need to just get in the bath, and then I need to listen to some water. And then I started swimming and using that as a part of my healing as well. And I think it's something to do with it just sort of makes you feel weightless.
But you also described sort of imagining your capacity for things as a jug slowly filling up with water.
That's right. I actually didn't even think of that, but yeah, I didn't connect that. So something that happened was early on when I would try to sort of have conversations with people and try to do normal life things, it just felt like my head was a jar of water that would just fill to capacity. And then I would have to stop and I'd be like, nope, that's it. That's all we can do, until the jar just sort of drains all the way back down on its own. And that was really the only way that I could think to describe it. Like, it was just coming up with a lot of strange metaphors for your internal sensations that no one else could really experience.
Well, I can assure you, you're not the only person who's wondered what the hell they're doing in their PhD. So, you know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Our
you,
next
Jay.
reader is Julia Nunes. She's going to read from her essay, The Next Hit. Julia is a journalist, editor, television producer, and I can attest to that because Julia and I worked together at Discovery Channel. She has accepted a National Magazine Award nomination. She's done feature writing for Chatelaine. She's had a Canadian Screen Award nomination. She's written 2 books about mental health, mental illness, Beyond Crazy, and The Last Taboo with Scott Simi. And she's written about concussion for the Toronto Star. Julia.
Hi, thanks, Jay. I'm sorry if I'm chuckling, but I can hear my son thumping upstairs doing his evening workout, even though I asked him to be quiet. So I apologize if you hear that too, but that is part of life with concussion, is you're always craving quiet and very rarely getting it. So yes, my essay is called The Next Hit because unfortunately I've had more than one hit, some small, some larger, but this section is about the big one. Despite the severity of the injury, many a doctor stifles a laugh as I answer the now familiar question, how did you hit your head? They're used to athletes or car accident victims or workers' comp claimants. I am none of the above. I'm a middle-aged mother with a desk job. Could there be a less injury-prone occupation than writer? Although I'll have to change that now because I've met so many writers here. On the evening it happens, I'm sitting with a friend on a comfy couch on the patio bar of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel at a small celebration for my boss's retirement. Wine glass in hand, I'm chatting blithely when, out of the corner of an eye, I see 2 colleagues stand and give each other a goodbye hug. Next, I hear a playful shriek. Then comes a sharp blow to my nose, someone's elbow or fist. My head whips back and the first hugger falls onto me. The second hugger falls onto her and I am underneath them both. Everyone's laughing except me. I haven't fallen, haven't hit my head on the ground, yet inside my skull, my brain is rotating, doing battle with solid bone. Things get blurry after that. I feel well enough to go out for dinner with friends. Are you all right? One of them asks as we eat. I'm not talking much. I'm there, but not there, distracted by one nagging question. Why do I feel so off? I send up a silent prayer. Please, God, not again.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. So you've had more than one. What struck me about your account is that some of them would seem at first glance to be trivial, like getting hit with a wiffle ball that the son upstairs, I guess, batted after you'd pitched it to him. And I don't know, and you say that your life has changed, but is it partly that not so much the effects of concussion, although they're there, but the anticipation that, as you said, you're a writer, like you should be safe, but really there's no complete safety?
Yeah, I've struggled with that question myself a lot. I think that what happens is once you've had one concussion, you're more susceptible to another one, especially if you haven't fully recovered before your next hit. And sometimes you can think you've fully recovered and you actually haven't. So I've learned that. And I went through a long period of why me, and I had to sort of stop doing that because it wasn't getting me anywhere. But I do find it's a fine line to straddle between being too cautious and also acknowledging the risk that I put myself under every time I step out onto an icy sidewalk. My son has also suffered from concussions, and so I struggle with that for him too. You know, you have to live your life, and yet how much risk are you willing to accept?
Speaking of accept, how difficult is that process of acceptance and acceptance of risk, but acceptance of symptoms, acceptance that your life has changed?
It has been the single biggest challenge for me. Someone said to me once, acceptance is not the same as defeat. And that was hugely helpful to me. And it's taken me a long time to come around to that. But I do think it was the most important breakthrough for me to be able to accept this is my life. This is what I'm dealing with. Other people often can't see it, as we've heard. And that too, you have to come to accept that the people around you aren't always going to understand what you're going through. So acceptance has been a huge part of recovery for me. Yeah.
And it just underlines something that we've touched on with a couple of the other readers, which is that a little bit of a sense of isolation, because as Diana said, well, you don't have a cast, right? So it's your verbal description that is all you have going for you. And that's hard.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that people hear about concussion through sport. You know,
Yeah.
Sidney Crosby, but he gets back on the ice and he's better. And we hear these stories of recovery. And it's hard to understand that not everyone recovers on the same timeline or in the same way or even completely. Again, I went through this a lot with my son. He looked fine and he had a lot of medical accommodations that even the best intentioned teachers would just forget about because he wasn't bleeding. He didn't. I sometimes said I wanted to send him to school with a huge bandage wrapped around his head as a reminder. I have learned, that's the other big thing I've learned, we are visual creatures, humans. We need to see something to really grasp what's going on.
Yeah. Well, you learned that in television too, didn't you?
True.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And our last reader is Jane Cawthorn. She will read from her essay, Lost. We've met Jane. She's largely or significantly responsible for this book, Impact. She writes about women on the brink of transformation. Her first novel, Patterson House, is coming out with Inanna in spring 2022. And she's edited another anthology with Edie Morin, Writing Menopause. Jane, you're back on stage. Hi,
I'm going to say not largely responsible because Elaine and I are such equal partners in this. And I just want to make sure that Elaine's recognized in that. Thanks so much, Jay. You asked really good questions. Okay, I'm going to read from my essay, Lost. And my essay, Lost, has a lot of footnotes because I tend to think in tangents now and go off in all directions. So you'll get a little taste of that. And I'm going to read two footnotes preceded by a couple of sentences in the main body of the essay to offer up some context. So here's the first one. For a long time, I was heavily invested in passing as a non-brain injured person. I still can. I look fine, but if I'm honest, all too often, passing does more harm than good. I don't get the help I need. Footnote 6. You tell me, there's no shame in needing help. No, there isn't. Now, I recognize my desire to pass as a form of internalized ableism. I didn't want anyone to know the extent of what had happened to me. Why? Do I think because my brain isn't working right, others might think less of me? Do I think less of myself? The simple answer is yes. Here's the second footnote I want to read. Gradually, I stopped looking for more help. I haven't given up, but I need a break from the relentless appointments, the questions, and the forms. Footnote 16. You have no idea about the bureaucracy of illness. There are forms for everything. I had and still have trouble with my handwriting. I would put the wrong things in the boxes. The appointments, the forms, they were all I did. They took so much energy and my life got so small. The worst appointments were set up by the insurance company. Their representatives sent me to several doctors to make sure I was not scamming the system. I understood that was their job, but I could barely explain to myself what was happening. Their doctors gaslighted me. They made me question myself. It's another tangent, another essay. If I wrote that essay, I would recount the incident in which the driver of the car that the insurance company sent to take me to one of their doctors looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "I'm not supposed to talk to you, but you need to know these people are not here to help you." Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jane. That's not a great thing to hear.
No.
I want to go back to a couple of things in your essay that you haven't addressed right now, but did then. And one very simple one that I think stands out for me as one of myriad examples of bumping up against something that just seems so shocking. You write that you forgot how to use the kitchen faucet.
Yep.
Can you enlarge on that? I mean, or let me put it this way, was that a significant thing to discover, or was that just yet another?
It was yet another. I think I wrote about that in the context of people always say to me, "Oh, I forget things too. Don't worry about it." You know, we all forget things. But I forget things that nobody else forgets and that aren't normal. Like I forget how to use the kitchen faucet. That was a while ago now. Now I know how to use the kitchen faucet, but it took a little while. But to just have these very simple everyday things, especially processes, anything that I had to manipulate, I could look at it and just have no idea how it worked anymore. Something I've used all my life. My garlic press, I couldn't put together. I've had my garlic press for 25 years. And all of a sudden it was a complete mystery to me. And it's not like it's not like you don't know what you don't know anymore, if that makes any sense. I mean, I was all too aware of what I'd lost and my inability to figure these things out. So it's very frustrating, but that frustration doesn't help bring it back, if that makes any sense.
No, it does make sense. You know, you make another reference to something that suggests to me there's a barrier in getting help, because you said, not in your words exactly, but you needed help, but you didn't want to be assessed or judged or found wanting. Do you think that that's something that many people who've endured a concussion feel?
Well, I know that that's something that comes up occasionally in the book, so I can't speak for everyone, but it's certainly happened to me. And, you know, that was part of my own internal struggle to be able to accept, like Julia was talking about, to be able to accept what had happened to me. And that is internalized ableism, to think that I'm not worthy anymore somehow because I'm broken. You know, that was a big struggle for me. And it was hard for me to even say those words, you know, and to type those words. I mean, there were a lot of tears when those words came out in this essay. It's a big struggle, especially for somebody like myself who's prided myself on my academic accomplishments, or being able to be a big presence in the world, to network people together, to be that person who can see the big ideas, to talk with my hands. That was a big change for me to come into this very, very small life where I had to really stop and struggle to figure out the simplest things.
So you've recovered to a significant degree, but do you feel like you're a different person though?
Yes, I am a different person. Absolutely.
And do you hope that you will continue to recover to the point where you are the Jane Cawthorn that you were before?
Well, it's been over 5 years now. I'm grateful that, for example, that I can read again, because I couldn't read at first. I'm grateful for all kinds of things that I can do now that I couldn't do at the beginning. I still can't read symbols and maps. They don't make any sense to me. Sure, I'd love it if those things came back. And of course, I always hold out hope that there's going to be additional recovery. Some people will say, you plateau, and then I don't want to be not optimistic, but this might be where I land. And if it is, that's okay. I've come to a place of acceptance around it, and other things come up like this book, which has been such a gift. This is not a book I ever would have attempted had this not happened to me, and it's been, I think, as I said in the beginning, the best working experience of my life.
That's actually terrific. And I obviously can't speak for people who have had concussions, but I'm beginning to think it's impossible to predict, say, a plateau, as you mentioned, or continued improvement. Because when you listen to everybody that we've heard tonight, how individual those experiences are, and while there are commonalities, even the commonalities are different from person to person, which I guess just reinforces that there's still an abundant mystery associated with concussion. And that's what we hope the researchers are going to disentangle and be able to help everyone. We have a few minutes left, and there's one question that I'd like to put to everybody, not necessarily simultaneously, but I'd like to put a question out there, and could we bring back everybody and just whoever's willing to answer this question. We are talking here to a number of people that have attended, and I'm urging to buy the book and buy several copies, give it to your friends. But I'd like any of you to tackle the question, what would you like readers, if there is a single message, what would you like readers to take away from your essay?
Wow, life changes in the instant. Those aren't my words. Those are Joan Didion's words, but it really does. And anything can happen at any time. And I think, if there's anything we've all learned in the last year and a half, it's that we need to be able to adapt, and adaptability is survival. It's hard. It's really hard work. I think the 21 writers in this book give a pretty good roadmap of how to do that.
I'd say so. Others?
I would just like to say that, I think that's something, even just listening to these different essays, and certainly my experience, that particularly as women, we are really conditioned to push through, to ignore symptoms, or to ignore, ailments, and to just be strong and carry on. And I think that probably a pretty common theme, and certainly what I experienced, what left me angry once I did start to seek treatment, were the months and the time that I lost trying to be okay when I wasn't. So I think that there's the lesson for me that I try to pass on to others when I'm talking to them about concussion or other things is to really listen to your body, you know, when it's saying no, not to ignore symptoms, to advocate for your own body, and just to not to try to be okay when you're not, because that took a lot of work for me. So I think that when I speak to people who are suffering newly with concussions, I always say, like, don't push through it. Like, you have to slow down and take stock and recover, because I think we do a lot of damage to ourselves, trying to pretend that it didn't happen, and I lost months to that. So that's what I would hope, if anyone in the audience has suffered a concussion, and is still grappling with it, that you take that to heart.
Well, that difficult combination of adaptability and acceptance. I mean, it comes through in all the writings in this book, and those are both hugely challenging things to do. At the same time, you're leading your life, you know, because I think most of us kind of think, yeah, this is the way life is, and this is the way life is going to continue. Then you start to get older and you realize it's not exactly true. Anybody else? Because I have one more quick question before we wrap up. Maybe I'll ask it. Has COVID made it somehow different to deal with concussion?
I would say that, as I mentioned, one of the things I crave is quiet, and it has been much quieter during COVID. I would also say that, you know, reading articles, particularly in the early days, people saying, oh, I can't do this, I can't go there, I can't see these people. Well, very, very familiar to me. I have lived it. And so has anyone with any kind of illness or chronic condition. And yeah, in a way, it made me feel stronger. I've already learned how to deal with that. And it was interesting to see people being so shocked by their sudden restrictions when I've lived them for a long time.
Yeah, I second that. I already knew how to live a really small life. I've been doing it for more than 3 years, and I already knew what it was not to have a social life, to go out, to do any of those things that, you know, you take for granted. And I felt almost like I could coach some people on how to get through things at the beginning of the pandemic. Of course, now everybody's getting to be a bit of an expert at it.
For me, it was a little different because this is not in my piece, but I went to Pittsburgh to a clinic there, and they told me that my brain had gotten hypersensitive to noise, because reacting to noise is one of my worst symptoms. And so I had to expose myself to noise. And I came back 2 weeks before the first shutdown. So I really freaked out at the beginning because I was in very bad shape with my concussion. And then on top of that, the one thing that was starting to make me better disappeared. So as a result, I got really almost depressed at the beginning of COVID. But then, as others say, once I came out of that, then I did have less of an extreme difference in my life than other people did. And it was quiet.
Yeah, it's definitely been quiet. Well,
just sorry, Jay, quickly mention something that came to mind earlier when Judy was speaking about treatment and marginalized folks. I really noticed a double tier in our medical system when I had my accident. I mean, we do have OHIP, but as I read about other people's experiences, they were, you know, when you have more resources, able to get an occupational therapist and start right away. And I was 6 months in before I was able to see a neurologist, and then could only see them, you know, several months, and things that were recommended. I couldn't, you know, I can't afford a stationary bike or, you know, in my apartment for those 20 minutes of cardio that was required. So I think it's worth considering when we talk about brain injuries, also about access, and that early treatment is so important. And I was really, really frustrated that I lost a lot of that 6 months, 9 months, a year before I understood what I could be doing. Very small, 10 minutes on a bike, but that would have made a very big difference to the trajectory, which is still happening, of my recovery.
That's a great comment. And, I think that you might listen to everybody tonight and think, well, boy, concussion's like a mirror. It reflects yourself to you and you learn a lot about yourself. But as Diana and Judy have pointed out, turn that mirror around. It says a lot about us and how we treat people that don't have obvious symptoms and how we treat people who are not privileged. Anyway, I could go on for a long time, but we did say that we would end this at 8 o'clock and it's a few minutes after. So I would just like to thank all of our speakers, Diana Smith, she's Judy Rebick, Amy Stewart, Tracy Wadebor, Julia Nunes, and Jane Cawthorn. And Jane, I don't know if you have a set of closing remarks, but I'm sure you want to say goodbye and thank you to everybody. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I guess first I'll say goodbye and thank you to you, Jay. You really do ask really good questions. And, I know from experience that sometimes dealing with a lot of brain injured people at once, things can really go off in all directions. So you were really good at keeping things on track. Thank you. I want to say thank you again to all the contributors who were with us tonight, and all the contributors who are in the audience, and everybody who had anything to do with this book. I'm so grateful to, I'm going to hold it up again because it's so beautiful. I'm so grateful to have it, and I'm so grateful that it's being launched out in the world today. And thank you to Elaine, and please go buy the book, go to Another Story or your local independent bookstore, and share our videos with your friends who have concussions. And I hope this book helps a lot of people. Thank you.
Great. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.